Continuing on with Chapter 11, we're moving beyond the Louisiana Purchase and into the coming Lewis and Clark expedition. Now, following the purchase in Louisiana, this 828,000 square miles that the United States acquired, this is a huge territory that needs to be surveyed and determine what's available there. To Jefferson, this is the Valley of Democracy. Remember, this fits nice and neatly in with his picture of the perfect American society and agrarian society, because farmers can move here and really create an awesome United States, this Valley of Democracy. So Jefferson sent his personal aide, Meriwether Lewis, along with Captain William Clark, to explore the northern portion of the Louisiana Purchase. They started going down the Mississippi River from St. Louis through the Rockies, down the Columbia River, and ultimately to the Pacific Ocean, this northern portion of the Purchase, being led by a Shoshone Native American, Sacagawea. This was a 2.5-year expedition in which they not only created hundreds and hundreds of maps of the area, but also scientific exploration, gaining knowledge about the local flora and fauna, and also the Native Americans of the area as well. And what this proved was that overland expansion was not only possible, but that it was, a successful thing because they came back. And so this is going to start pushing settlers further and further west. Okay, here you see the northern portion of that movement all the way from St. Louis out to the Pacific Ocean. And then the two stunning young men here, Lewis and Clark. So in 1804, Thomas Jefferson was running for re-election, and he absolutely was not going to name Aaron Burr as his running mate again. He's still a little angry with him over the whole debacle from 1800 where Aaron Burr did not step out of the race for the presidency, and so he was dropped from the presidential ticket in 1804. Now, by this point, the 12th Amendment has passed, so we don't have to worry anymore about first place and second place. And following his being dropped as the VP during this second term, Aaron Burr went back to New York, and some would say, and this is still some shady history, that he had tried to create some sort of a conspiracy with local Federalists in New York. New York has a lot of Federalists located there, even though Aaron Burr was a Democratic Republican, trying to see if they could get New England and New York to secede from the Union. Now, this along with some other reasons, namely because Hamilton had really blocked his ascension for governor of New York, he'd blocked his ascension for president back in 1800, Aaron Burr challenged Alexander Hamilton to a duel. And at Weehawken, New Jersey, Alexander Hamilton was shot and killed in this duel by Aaron Burr. Alexander Hamilton, it is said by the people that were there, had shot in the air, and Aaron Burr, obscured by the fog, didn't realize he had shot in the air and shot and killed him right there. And with the death of Alexander Hamilton, this essentially started the death march for the Federalists, because remember, Hamilton was considered the leader of the Federalist Party. It's not going to be long until the Federalist Party is completely dead. Now, following this first conspiracy in order to get New York and New England to separate from the United States, Aaron Burr, allegedly once again, tried to create a new conspiracy or a new scheme working with the governor of the Louisiana Territory, James Wilkinson, to try to separate the new territory of Louisiana from the United States and obviously create him as the president or the king or the leader of the Louisiana Territory. The problem with this is that they were supposed to meet up in Natchez, Mississippi with an army. But before that could happen, Aaron Burr was betrayed and he was arrested for treason in 1806. This court case was taken all the way to the Supreme Court, where John Marshall, along with obviously the other justices on the Supreme Court, acquitted him, saying that there had been no overt action taken yet. All that had happened up until that point was planning and talking and whatnot, but an army had not yet been raised in order to march against the United States. So with this, Aaron Burr was acquitted for treason, and he fled to Europe, where once again he tried to meet with Napoleon to try to create some sort of an alliance with Napoleon to get him to attack the United States. This never happened. Napoleon refused to meet with Aaron Burr, but nonetheless, Aaron Burr is a disgrace and came back to the United States. Here you see one artist rendering of this duel at Weehawken, New Jersey, and a picture of this dirtbag Aaron Burr. Now, the 1804 election of Thomas Jefferson, which he easily won, his second term in office is going to focus much more on foreign affairs, and not as successful as his first term in office was. Jefferson now had to contend with a war that was now raging between Great Britain and France, and the United States was kind of caught in the middle. They had tried to act as a neutral merchant, trying to sell goods to both Great Britain and to France, but this is obviously going to be extremely difficult, especially since the British had control over the seas after the Battle of Trafalgar, and the French had control over the European continent at the Battle of Austerlitz. Basically saying that should the Americans want to ship goods to the French on land, they would be blockaded on the seas. And if they actually made it to the land and wanted to ship them overland to the British Army, they would be blockaded by the French. So trade with both countries was essentially disallowed, making it very difficult for Americans to trade with anyone. To add insult to injury, the British continued to impress American sailors on the high seas, meaning kidnapping them and forcing them into the British Navy. So all of this is something that Thomas Jefferson has to contend with. Remember, he has reduced the size and scope of the U.S. Army and Navy, and so he doesn't really have a lot of muscle to back up any sort of military plan. So instead, Thomas Jefferson chose to go a different route with an Embargo Act of 1807, saying that the United States would no longer trade with Great Britain or France until this issue was resolved. He called this peaceful coercion to try to cut them off from American imports and exports. The problem with this is that it actually hurt the American economy more, because not only were we going to trade with France and Great Britain, but we also said that we would not allow British and French goods into the United States. This is a major problem, not only for people who want to ship their goods elsewhere, but for people who want to buy British and French goods. And the British and the French don't really need American products. They've got huge colonies in order to supply them many of or all of their goods that they possibly could need. So for a very short period of time, even though Alexander Hamilton is dead, this did revive the Federalist Party in opposition to this Embargo Act. So following the Embargo Act, Congress repealed this because they realized it was a stupid law in March of 1801 and instead replaced it with the Non-Intercourse Act. Now this is going to be done under James Madison, who took over after Thomas Jefferson. But the Non-Intercourse Act is not really that much different from the Embargo Act. It reopened all trade except with France and Great Britain proper. So now the United States was able to trade with their colonies, just not France and Great Britain. So it's still not much of a punishment against France and Great Britain for all of the junk that they're putting the United States through. So basically the United States has too much of a reliance on foreign goods, and they are expecting that they need our products way too much as well. But it did have a side consequence that was pretty decent for the time, that because we couldn't buy British and French goods, this did start for a very small window of time, jump-started American manufacturing again. Now, we are still not yet to an industrial revolution, but it's slowly progressing towards that end result. So now on to James Madison. Like I said, James Madison was elected president assumed the office of presidency in 1809. Now remember, James Madison, he's the father of the Constitution, he wrote the Bill of Rights, and he was the Secretary of State under Thomas Jefferson. They were pretty much best friends for that time in office, so he has a lot of the same ideas as Thomas Jefferson. Under James Madison, Congress passed Macon's Bill No. 2. Now, the Embargo Act didn't work. The Non-Intercourse Act didn't work either. So Macon's Bill No. 2 was meant to lure France or Great Britain back to trading with the United States. So when the United States had implemented an embargo on France and Great Britain, they had both implemented embargoes against the United States, or what Great Britain called, councils in Orders in Council, which was their embargo against the United States. So Macon's Bill number 2 said, whichever country, either France or Great Britain, lifts their trade restrictions against the United States first, the United States will trade with them solely. This is a terrible idea because it's allowing Europe to choose our ally instead of taking a more concrete approach towards this, allowing them to choose who we are going to trade with. Now, Napoleon lifted his trade restrictions against the United States because he knew that Great Britain never would. So, neutrality was never going to be possible for the United States between France and Great Britain. Here you see a picture of James Madison as president. Now moving towards the War of 1812. So we already know there are issues being had between the United States and Great Britain, which we'll talk more about in a second. Now, moving to the Western Territory, specifically Indiana as an area, there are new quote-unquote war hawks in Congress. These are congressmen who are looking for a fight. They're looking to go to war. Now, 2 Native Americans at this time, Tecumseh and his brother Tenskwatawa, who's better known as the Prophet. They are from the Shawnee tribe. They're sick and tired of white Americans infiltrating their native lands. So Tecumseh and his brother the Prophet tried to create an Indian confederacy to try to link all of the Native American tribes in the Western Territory to stop the white infiltration. Basically, all tribes east of the Mississippi River were welcomed into this confederacy, that we should not cede our lands unless all of the Native Americans agree. Now, from the American perspective, they are really not sure about Tecumseh and the Prophet. They felt that these 2 men were hurting America out west, obviously, would be attacking, and then would be able to run away and hide up in British Canada. They felt that the British up in Canada were agitating or were creating this unsavory situation by supplying these Native Americans Tecumseh and his brother, the Prophet. And so the United States government is sick and tired of the British, and so they send the governor of Indiana, William Henry Harrison, future president of the United States, to attack Tecumseh's forces at the confluence of the Wabash and the Tippecanoe River. This is known as the Battle of Tippecanoe. Where at the Battle of Tippecanoe, Tecumseh's forces were defeated by William Henry Harrison, and this Indian Confederacy idea went away. But nonetheless, even though with the end to this Indian Confederacy, these war hawks in Congress are still very aggravated with the British up in Canada. Not just the fact that they have been agitating the Native Americans out in the Western Territories, but also because they have never vacated their northwest posts. Here you see Tecumseh and his brother, the Prophet, Tenskwatawa. And so these congressmen are screaming for war. They want to take Canada out. They felt that it was a base for Native Americans to run away and hide in. Not only that, they're very irritated with the impressment of American sailors on the high seas, and the fact that the British have never vacated their posts on the Northwest Territory are all reasons why the war hawks within the Republican Party are demanding war with Great Britain. They wanted to prove to the rest of the world that the Revolutionary War was not a fluke, and they wanted to defend this idea of republicanism, that our government is a good one, and that winning the Revolutionary War wasn't just, a mistake on our part. So, in June of 1812, a declaration for war vote was called in Congress, and in a very close vote, the United States finally declared war on Great Britain to not only end the impressment of sailors on the high seas, to take Canada out so it could no longer be a base of operations for Native Americans, and because the British had never vacated their posts in the Northwest Territory, like they'd promised during the Revolutionary War. This vote was absolutely partisan, meaning the Republicans in Congress voted yes, the Federalists in Congress voted no, and it was along sectional lines, meaning the Northern Federalists did not want this to happen because a war with Great Britain would mean they could no longer ship their goods to the British. Whereas in the South and in the West, they absolutely were in favor of this war because taking control of Canada could possibly add to their territory. And we will move on from there with Chapter 12 into the War of 1812.